Imagine defending a hilltop fortress with approximately 2,000 soldiers, civilians, and women against Ottoman commanders Ahmed Pasha and Kara Ahmed Pasha, leading 40,000 elite troops armed with massive bronze cannons capable of pulverizing medieval stonework, knowing that if your walls fall, the wealthy mining towns of northern Hungary lie completely defenseless behind you, and the fragmented kingdom shattered at Mohacs 26 years earlier will lose its last strategic anchor, September 9 to October 18. 1552, Hungarian captain István Dobo commanded Eger fortress through 39 days of continuous siege, where Ottoman artillery bombardment systematically destroyed the southern wall stone by stone, until a catastrophic Fowers breach opened wide enough for mass infantry assault. Here's what makes this defense legendary. A young inventor named Gergely Bornemisza created improvised explosive weapons from gunpowder, oil, resin, and clay fire barrels that rolled downhill, exploding among packed formations. Oil-soaked projectiles that ignited on impact, creating barriers of flame, and clay spheres filled with explosive mixtures that shattered against shields in unpredictable bursts. During the climactic ninth-day breach assault, when Ottoman infantry stormed through the collapsed wall section, Bornemisza's firepots erupted among the attackers, while a sudden wind shift blew Ottoman artillery smoke back into their own lines, creating confusion that allowed exhausted defenders to counterattack and drive the assault back through sheer desperation. What's historically remarkable, women of Eger fought alongside men, carrying stones and boiling water to the ramparts, rebuilding walls under fire, and defending breach positions when Ottoman soldiers broke through. Their participation documented in primary sources and commemorated in Hungarian national memory. After 39 days, including dozens of scaling attempts, mining operations, and the catastrophic wall breach, the Ottoman army withdrew, having failed to capture a fortress 1/20th their size. The defense saved the northern mining regions and proved that technological innovation and civilian unity could defeat overwhelming military superiority. To understand why the Siege of Eger became one of the most celebrated defensive victories in European history and a foundational myth in Hungarian national identity, you need to understand the catastrophic context of the Battle of Mohacs in 1526, the disaster that destroyed the medieval kingdom of Hungary in approximately 2 hours of combat, 26 years before Eger's siege. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent's army annihilated King Louis II's Hungarian forces so completely that the young king drowned, fleeing the battlefield. The nobility was slaughtered almost to the last man, and the kingdom itself fractured into 3 pieces like a shattered mirror. One region fell under direct Ottoman rule centered on Buda. Another desperately accepted Habsburg protection, sacrificing independence for survival. Everything in between became a chaotic frontier, a patchwork of villages, minor fortresses, and desperate people simply trying to survive between 2 empires. For a generation after Mohacs, Hungarians lived under a shadow that grew longer every year. Fortress after fortress collapsed under Ottoman pressure with systematic inevitability. Buda, once the proud royal capital, fell in 1541 after sustained siege, Székesfehérvár, where Hungarian kings had been crowned for 5 centuries, was lost. Veszprém fell. Each conquest marked the slow, inexorable retreat of what remained of Hungarian territory. Each year, the frontier shrank northward. Each year, the crescent banners climbed closer to the wealthy mining towns that represented Hungary's economic survival, the silver mines of northern Hungary that could pay armies, sustain resistance, and potentially fund reconquest. By early autumn 1552, the Ottoman Empire's strategic planners saw an opportunity too perfect to ignore. If those northern mining towns fell into Ottoman hands, the Habsburgs would bleed coin, soldiers, and political influence. Hungary's fragmented remnants would lose their economic foundation, and standing directly before those precious mines was a single hilltop fortress guarding the northern approach like a lonely gatekeeper, Eger. Eger was not a mighty city or grand strategic capital that featured prominently on European maps. It was a relatively small stronghold surrounded by vineyards, fields, and narrow cobblestone streets where farmers, soldiers, Catholic priests, craftsmen, and their families lived shoulder to shoulder in a tight community. Most foreign generals barely bothered to learn how to pronounce its name correctly, but the people living within those walls understood with absolute clarity how fragile their world had become through bitter experience. They had seen endless streams of refugees dragging carts along dusty roads, fleeing from Ottoman-occupied territories. They had heard whispered stories of burning towns and massacred populations. They had watched distant columns of smoke rising from fortresses that once seemed untouchable, strongholds that had stood for centuries reduced to rubble in days. No one in Eger believed they were the center of anything important in the grand schemes of empires, but they understood this fundamental strategic reality with perfect clarity if their walls ever gave way to Ottoman assault. Everything behind them, the silver mines, the agricultural countryside, the northern approach routes into what remained of Royal Hungary would lie completely open and utterly defenseless. Far to the south in the warmer Danube plains, closer to the administrative heart of the Ottoman Empire, military commanders were already setting ambitious plans into motion with the confidence born from decades of unbroken victories. The empire had tasted conquest across 3 continents. Its armies were battle-hardened, supremely confident, and supported by a logistical war machine more sophisticated and organized than anything fragmented Hungary could possibly field after Mohacs. 2 experienced commanders, Ahmed Pasha and Kara Ahmed Pasha, sources vary on exact leadership structure, prepared to lead a combined force of approximately 40,000 soldiers northward toward the Hungarian frontier. They studied detailed maps, calculated marching distances, assessed supply requirements, and sent confident messages to Constantinople confirming what everyone in the imperial court already believed as obvious truth: Eger would fall quickly. Eger should fall quickly, by every military calculation. Eger was simply too small, too isolated, too poorly garrisoned to stand meaningfully in the path of an empire at the height of its power. And so, the massive preparations began with the methodical efficiency that characterized Ottoman military operations. The Ottoman army didn't move like an ordinary military force. It moved like an entire traveling civilization. Tens of thousands of infantry soldiers and cavalry units gathered on the assembly plains. Military engineers assembled crates of specialized tools, wooden beams, iron spikes, and equipment for sophisticated siege works. Siege masters personally inspected gunpowder supplies, artillery fuses, and the long wooden support beams needed to construct assault ramps and undermining tunnels. Long lines of camels and oxen strained visibly beneath the enormous weight of bronze cannons, some relatively small for rapid fire and maneuverability. Others, so monumentally massive, they required entire specialized teams just to transport them across rough terrain. These guns represented the pride of the Ottoman Empire's technological superiority weapons specifically designed through decades of refinement to turn medieval stone fortifications into dust and psychological fear into immediate surrender. Supply wagons loaded with food provisions, water barrels, thousands of tents, timber for construction, and medical supplies stretched beyond the visible horizon. Blacksmiths hammered emergency repairs late into the night, their forges glowing. Ottoman war drums rolled rhythmically as infantry and cavalry units formed into precise marching columns. The entire assembled host moved with an effortless confidence born from years of consecutive victories across multiple theaters. They had systematically crushed strongholds far larger and better fortified than tiny Eger. They had broken professional armies far greater in size and quality than anything shattered. Demoralized, Hungary could now assemble when the signal finally came on a warm morning at the edge of autumn. The ground seemed to physically tremble beneath thousands of synchronized marching steps, under thousands of snapping green crescent banners that blocked out portions of the sky. The great Ottoman host began its methodical march northward toward Hungary. Its destination was Eger Fortress. Its commanders confidently expected another easy, routine conquest to add to their impressive records. But beyond the distant hills, inside that small, quiet fortress that most of Europe had never heard of, waited a community of people who had already made a collective decision. They would not run. They would not surrender, no matter what overwhelming force was coming. When the Ottoman army began moving north with inexorable momentum, its advance fundamentally changed everything across the Hungarian frontier region. Villages emptied completely as civilians fled. Roads fell eerily silent. Inside Eger, the suffocating weight of what was approaching settled over the fortress community long before the enemy actually appeared on the horizon. In the council chamber, the Hungarian nobles and military officers understood the strategic situation with unsettling, brutal clarity. Reinforcements from Habsburg forces were extremely unlikely to arrive in time given the distances and political complexities. Retreat would abandon the entire northern region to Ottoman conquest and occupation. Eger desperately needed someone who could manage a prolonged siege with military discipline, strategic thinking, and most importantly, a steady hand capable of keeping people focused and organized when existential fear threatened to unravel everything. That critical decision led directly to Captain István Dobó. His military reputation was built not on dramatic battlefield victories or heroic charges, but on something more valuable in siege warfare: composure under pressure, organizational ability, and the proven capacity to transform limited resources into effective defense. He knew from hard experience how fortresses survived overwhelming odds through meticulous organization, collective endurance, and the psychological ability to keep defenders focused on immediate tasks when terror threatened paralysis. He was the only commander available who could take Eger's severely limited resources and turn them into something that might actually hold against 40,000 Ottoman soldiers. When István Dobó arrived and assumed command, he immediately went straight to work with systematic efficiency. He personally inspected the fortress walls from corner to corner, carefully evaluating angles of potential attack, identifying weak points in aging stonework, mapping blind spots in defensive coverage, and calculating the precise positions where Ottoman cannons could inflict maximum structural damage. He examined the gates with a critical eye, checked well water supplies, inventoried ammunition stores and gunpowder reserves, assessed food supplies for extended siege, and studied the narrow interior streets that could become crucial choke points if enemy soldiers broke through outer defenses. Dobo wasn't looking for strengths to celebrate. He was methodically counting vulnerabilities and matching each identified weakness with a specific defensive plan. Once Dobo's organizational work began in earnest, the fortress underwent rapid